We start in Mirz Hashem, the ninth perek, which is perek Yesh Mutaros, and that's on Daf Pei Dalet. The Mishnah says the following: Yesh Mutaros lebaleim v'asuros liyabmehem, Mutaros liyabmehem v'asuros lebaleim, Mutaros lielu ulielu, asuros lielu lielu. So the Mishnah divides up into four different categories, and we're dealing with two different factors. And they are the heter between the Baal and the Isha. That's the Baal who dies, unfortunately, without children. And then his wife falls for Yibum. And what's the relationship between the Yevamot and the Yavam? So we're going to have four scenarios. We're going to have categories in which there's a heter to the Baal, but an Isa to the Yavam. And the reverse, a heter to the Yavam, but an Isa to the Baal. And then we're going to have cases where the mutaros elu and asuros elu. So now the Mishnah is going to flesh it out and give us actual scenarios that fit into all these four categories. The elu and the following are mutaros lebaleim, the asuros liyabmehem. So here's a case, and we're going to have a few cases where the relationship between the Baal, which means the late husband, and his wife is heter, but she falls for Yibum to his brother, and there's an Isur. Kohen hejot shenosas almana. Kohen's allowed to marry an almana, so that's called mutaros lebaleim. But guess who his brother is? His brother, surviving brother, is no less than the Kohen Gadol himself. Yeshlo ach Kohen Gadol, and an almana by definition is prohibited to a Kohen Gadol. So therefore, asuros liyabmehem. Now, in this case, the Mishnah did not have to say Kohen hejot shenosas almana, because in truth, even if it was Kedushin alone, that would be sufficient to convey the message that there's a heter to the Baal, but an Isa to the Yevamot, because she is an almana. So we don't need Nesuin here. The Gemara is going to pick that up, why the Mishnah mentions Nesuin. Now, the next case we have is a Kohen who's a Cholol, Shenosa Kshera. He marries a woman that he's allowed to marry. A Cholol is someone who is born from Psulei Kuna. He marries a girl who's not a Zona, not a Cholola. She's not a Gioris. She's Muteres. She's Kshera. However, when he dies, and his wife falls for Yibum, she's already a Chalola. V'yeshlo, and this Cholol has a brother who's a Kohen. And he's a Kohen kosher. So you have two brothers. The late brother is a Kohen Cholol, whereas his brother, who survived, is a Kohen kosher. And in such a case, she is muteres labal, but asura liyavam, because after the Baal consummates his marriage with an Isha Ksherit, she becomes a Chalola by virtue of a Bia with a Cholol. And now she falls for Yibum to a Kosher, the second brother, the surviving brother's a Kosher, and he is also to a Chalola. Another example of a case where the original marriage is beheter, but the tefillah for Yibum is be'isur to the surviving brother. Yisrael shenasa bas Yisrael, fine. Everything's wonderful. But yeshlo ach mamzer. He has a brother who's born from Isurei Arayos, and he's a mamzer. So there's no way that we can allow a mamzer to marry the bas Yisrael. And you can have in the flip case, mamzer shenasa mamzeres, which is perfectly permissible, but yeshlo ach Yisrael. So now the mamzeres falls for Yibum to the Yavam, and this is another case of mutaros lebaleim v'asuros liyabmehem. Now we go to the second category, v'elu mutaros liyabmehem v'asuros lebaleim. So here there's a perfectly legitimate marriage to the Yavam, as opposed to the previous case, but the original marriage to the Baal was an illegal marriage. Kohen Gadol shekidesh es albana, And it's interesting, at this point, the Mishnah used the word Kiddush. Before, the Mishnah used the word Nasa. And the shift is obvious because here in the case of a Kohen Gadol, this is already Asuras B'Malem with Kiddushin. And yet we want to set a case of Mutaros Liyavmeim. So it can't be that the Kohen Gadol had Nisuin, which means he consummated the marriage, because if he consummated the marriage with an Almana, she becomes a Chalola. And that would be Asuras L'Balem. So it's got to be a case where the Kohen Gadol was Makadish the Almana, but he didn't consummate with an intimacy. And now what happens is an Almana falls for even to the Ach, who's the Kohen Hedjot, so he's allowed to marry her, and it's Mutarisli Yivmeim. Another case of a Kohen Kosher, Shenosach Halola. And this is a violation of the Iser Lav that a Kohen is enjoined for marrying a Chalol. So he violated that Lav. The marriage is illegitimate. It's Asuris L'Baleim. But Yesho Ach Chalol, his brother, the Yavam, is a Chalol. And therefore he's permitted to marry a Chalola. So his Yibum is Mutter. Another case, Yisrael Shenasa Mamzeres, which is an illegitimate marriage. He's not allowed to marry a Psulei Kol. But V'yeshloach Mamzer, his brother's a Mamzer, so she, the Mamzeres, falls for Yibum to the brothers of Mamzer, and that's considered Mutaris Li'Yibmeim. Next case, Mamzer Shenasa Bas Yisrael, which is again an illegitimate marriage. This is the flip side of the previous case, and Yeshloach Yisrael. And now what happens is that his brother is a Yisrael, and he's allowed to marry this woman. Why? Because the Yevamot is not a mamzeret. She doesn't become a mamzeret by virtue of the fact that she was married to a mamzer. And therefore, the Mishnah summarizes these cases as mutaros li'yibmeim v'asuros lebalem. V'elu, and here we have asuros li'elu u'li'elu. Both Baleam was an illegitimate marriage, and she falls for Yibum to a Yavam who has an Isa to marry this Yavam, a Kohen Gadol, Shenosas Almana, again an illegitimate marriage, but Yechol Ach Kohen Gadol. Now, how could it be that he has a brother who's a Kohen Gadol? If he's the Kohen Gadol, there's only one Kohen Gadol, but it could be that his brother took over for him after he died, or alternatively, you can have a Kohen Mashuach Melchama. In any event, she's Asuros Le'elu. She was prohibited to her first husband, the Kohen Gadol, and now to the second husband, Kohen Gadol, because an Almada to a Kohen Gadol is an Isolah. Kohen Hedjot. Let's say that the brother of the Kohen Gadol is a regular Kohen Hedjot, but he's not allowed to marry a Chalola. And by virtue of the marriage between the Almana and the Kohen Gadol, since there's an Isa Kahuna, she becomes a Chalola who falls for Yibum to an Ach Kohen Kosher. So therefore, there's illegitimate marriages here in both directions. Next, Yisrael Shenosam Mamzeres. V'yeshlo Ach Yisrael. So he wasn't allowed to marry a Mamzeres. His brother is the Yisrael. The Mamzeres falls for Yibum to Yisrael, and that also is Asura. Then we have Mamzer Shenosam Bas Yisrael, again an illegitimate marriage. Yeshlo Ach Mamzer. So she's a Bas Yisrael, and she falls for Yibum to a Mamzer, and that's Asuras Li'elu Uli'elu. Shar Kol Anoshim, Mutaris L'Baleim, Uli'ivmeim. By passive elimination, any other categories, any other cases and scenarios, it's always going to be Mutar both Baleim and Li'ivmeim. Now the Mishnah shifts its discussion over to Shnios L'Arayos. And these are Isurei Erva D'Rabbanan, for example, the mother of his mother. Shnios midivrei sofrim, and we have a case of shnia lebal below shnia liyavam. Okay, so there was an illegitimate marriage on a drabana level between the Baal and the Isha. They were shnios, like let's say he married his grandmother, but when she falls for Yibum, is mutaris liyavam. The Yavam himself has no kurva relationship to this man's grandmother. Now, how can you have two brothers and one is related as a grandson to his grandmother, the other is not? So here we have a little bit of a diagram and it's Sarah marries Yaakov, and they have a child by the name of Reuven. Yaakov marries Rachel, and Rachel is not related to Reuven at all. Now, what happens is, from the marriage between Yaakov and Rachel, they have a son named Shimon. So Shimon and Reuven are paternal brothers. They both have the same father, Yaakov. And Shimon goes ahead and he marries the mother of Rachel, we'll call her Rivka, who's his grandmother. That's Shnios Larayos. So this will be a case of Asuros Labal, but now, after Shimon dies, and his wife Rivka, who's also his grandmother, falls for even to Reuven, Reuven is not related to Rivka at all, and therefore it's Muteris Liyavam. Now we have the reverse case. Shnia Liyavam, Velo Shnia Labal. As far as the Yavam is concerned, there is no relationship of a Shnia. But to the Baal, right? So, I'm sorry. To the Baal, there is no relationship of Shnia, but there is a relationship of Shnia Larais to the Yavam. It's Asur Liyavam Mutaris Labal. I mean, it's pretty much exactly the same case that we had before. The only difference is that in the previous case, Sarah was married to Yaakov, that had a son named Reuven. Yaakov was married to Rachel, that had a son named Shimon. Rachel has a mother named Rivka. And then Reuven marries Rivka, which is not a problem because he's not related anyway, anyhow, to Rivka. But now when Reuven dies, and his wife Rivka falls for Yibam, that's his brother Shimon's grandmother. So it's Mutaris Labal, but Asura Liyavam. Now we have a case of Asura Shnia Lazeh Ulazeh, Asura Lazeh Ulazeh. There's a case where Yaakov marries Rachel, the daughter of Rivka. They have a child named Reuven and another child named Shimon. So both Reuven and Shimon are in the same exact boat, which means that if Reuven marries Rivka, who is his grandmother and Shnia Midrabanan, right? Because Rivka is the mother of Rachel, and Rachel is the mother of Reuven, because Yaakov was married to Rachel, and he had a son, Reuven. Now, when Reuven dies, his wife, Rivka, falls for Yibam to Shimon, to her grandson, who's a Shnia Larai. So that's Asura Lazeh. Now, the balance of the Mishnah is going to contrast the cases of Shnios with the cases of an Isur Doraisa, an Isur Erev Doraisa, or an Isur Lav Doraisa, with regard to Ksuba. And there's something very counterintuitive about this half of the Mishnah. In a case where the marriage was illegitimate because of Shnios Larayos, she forfeits her Ksuba. So if a man marries a woman who is Asura Allah B'Shnia Larayos, Ein La, she doesn't have any part of the Ksuba. The Gemara is going to explain that this is a Knas, a penalty imposed upon her because she married an illegitimate marriage midrabanan of Shnias Larayos. She loses Lo Ksuba, which is called Mana Masayim. She loses Peros, meaning L'chora, if this marriage is going to end up in divorce, then the Baal should not have any rights to eat the Peros of Nichsei Malug, and now he has to reimburse her and compensate for the Nichsei Malug. No, she will have no rights to collect the Peros of Nichsei Malug. V'lo Mizonos, no, within the framework of this marriage can she demand support. V'lo blows, and if she brought in begadim into the marriage and they became a little bit disintegrated, which normally she gets it back when he divorces her, here, no, she's not going to get it back. All this is a knas imposed on a woman who willingly got married to a Shniya La'erev, and we want to stop this marriage and terminate it with a get, and she loses all her ksuba rights within the framework of that get. Bavlad kosher, however, the child that's born from an Isur of Shniya Sarayis is not a mamzer. There's no such thing as a mamzer from an Isa Darbanan. We're going to force him to divorce his wife. Now, all this is in the cases of Shneels. Now we go back to the cases of a woman who's Asura Olav Midoraisa. Like Almana L'Kohen Gadol, Kush V'Chalutza Kohen Hedot, Mamzer S'Nesil Yisrael, Bas Yisrael L'Noz L'Mamzer. And in all these cases, Yesh La Ksuba, the Rabbanan are not going to remove and uproot her rights to the Ksuba. She doesn't deserve a knas, a penalty. And the Gemara is going to say in this case, she's very eager to get divorced. She has no benefits whatsoever from this marriage, and therefore we don't have to consent her in order to rope her in to receive the get. She's waiting online for the get. On the contrary, he's going to be penalized, and he's going to have to pay up all the chiyuvim of the ksuba. And all of this is in a case where the illegitimacy of the marriage was dorai. So now we're up to the Gemara. My area de tani nasa, usnei kiddush. When the Mishnah discusses a case of a Kohen Hedjot who marries an almana, and that's a case of muteres labal v'asur liyavam, why does it have to mention that they consummated the marriage? Lisnei kiddush, that would have been sufficient, because as far as the yavam, the brother, surviving brother is concerned, he's a Kohen Gadol, he can't marry an almana. So what do you gain by adding the suin over here? Why not tell me a bigger chiddush that even if it was only kedushin between the Baal and his wife, that's enough for muteres lezev asura liyama. Don't try to pull the following shtick and say taima de nasa davi leaseh velosaseh. Maybe it's got to be a case of a nasa, so that the iser with the death of the Yavam to the Kohen Gadol, his brother the Yavam, is not only a violation of a law of Almana le Kohen Gadol, but it's also a violation of an essay of who Isha B'Ptulei Yika, because they consummated the marriage. And if not for the addition of the essay, then we would have tipped the scale in favor of Yibum. The Chi of Yibum, as the mitzvah say, would override the Lotas of Almana le Kohen Gadol. And in such a case, he would be obligated to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Yibum. It would not be Asura Liyavama. And the Gemara rejects this. Aval Kidesh Asi Ese B'Dochalosa cannot be. Why? Vakulu Pirka, in the entire Perek, which mentions all the different scenarios of an Iser Lav that fell for Yibum, Ase Velosa Sehu, Velo Asi Ese B'Dochilosa Sehu. We're going to apply the principle of lo asiyase v'dachiloses. Like, for example, the Mishnah is going to talk about a mamzeres or an asina that fell and followed Yisrael for yibum, and we're going to prohibit the yibum. We're not going to apply the principle of ese dochalosase for whatever reason, either because chalitza is an option, or because we're having zera of bia shniya to bia rishon, or whatever explanation it is. But the Mishnah is predicated on the assumption that ein essay dochalosa in the case of Yibum. We don't have to add an essay. In the case of Yisrael to a mamzeres, there's no essay. It's just a losas. And yet, ein essay dochalosas. Therefore, the Gemara offers a second possible answer, which the Gemara is going to reject this as well, as to why the Mishnah opens up with the word nasa and not kiddush. Mishum de kabbalah misnei sefer. Maybe it's an ID kind of structure. And in the Sefer, it's Kohen Gadol Shenasa Salmana, and he has a brother who's either a Kohen Gadol or a Kohen Hedjot. And in this case, we have a situation of Asura Lazeh Ulazeh. Now, why is it Asura Lazeh Ulazeh? In the case of the Kohen Gadol, I understand he's enjoined from marrying an Almana. But now he dies, and is surviving brothers a Kohen Hedjot. If he's a Kohen Hedjot, what's the problem with an Almana? So why is that Asur L'zeh? And the answer is because it was Nasa Kohen Gadol. And if it was Nasa Kohen Gadol, it means he had a relationship with her Bia, and through that Bia she became a Chalola, and his brother, who's a Kohen Hedjot, is now also to the Yevamot. Amal Kidesh. But if the Kohen Gadol had only been Makadesh this woman, and he didn't consummate the marriage with intimacy, she did not become a chalola. She's just an almana. She falls for yibum to his brother, who's a Kohen Hedjot, and that would be muteres liyava. Is therefore Tananami Reisha nasa. So Gemara rejects this as well. Why? Because there's the Reisha of the Reisha, there's a Sefer of the Reisha, then there's a Reisha of the Sefer. There are three cases here, and you're jumping fast forward to the third case. Well, what about the middle case? Let's look at the middle case. The middle case. And the word Kidesh would be appropriate in the first case of the Kohen Gadol with an Almana, whose surviving brother is a Kohen Hedjot. And there the word Kidesh would be appropriate, and it would fit into a pattern with the Mitziyasa. What's the Mitziyasa? Kohen Gadol, Shekidesh es Almana v'yeshlo ach Kohen Hedjot. And now when this woman falls for Yibum to a Kohen Hedjot, she's an Almana, she's not a Halola because the Kohen Gadol never consummated his marriage, and that would be a case of Asur Labal Umuteres Liyama. So we see in the very next case in the Mishnah, which is called the Mitziyasa, we have a case of Kidesh, and the Mishnah B'dafka uses the word Kidesh. Ella says the Gemara, you know why the Mishnah mentions Nasa? Mishum bar bukta. Bar bukta is an idiomatic phrase which means a shachin, like a neighbor. And what's the neighbor here? The Kabbai Lemitzne, within the Reisha of the Reisha, we have a case of Chalal Shenasa Kshera, which means Muteres Lezeh. He's allowed to marry a Kshera. However, when his wife falls for Yibum to an Ach Kosher, a Kohen Kosher, then she's Asura Liyib Mehem. And the reason for that is because a Kohen Hedjot is not allowed to marry a Chalola. And the very moment that the Chalol married the Chalola and he, he consummated the marriage with Bia, she becomes a Chalola, and therefore she's Asura Liyib Mehem. It's time of the Nasa, but this only makes sense if it was Nasa. This Shavi Chalola. Avakide Sharilah. So therefore, it makes sense that the Mishnah was B'dafka and said Chalol Shenasa Kshera, and therefore the Reisha, in the case of the Kohen Gadol who marries an Almana, we should have had again the word Nasa. We should have had the word Kidesh. But the answer is that since within the Reisha we needed to introduce the word Nasa in the case of a Chalol who is married to a Kshera, therefore, in the Reisha of the Mishnah, the Reisha of the Reisha, Almana Kohen Gadol, he mentions Nasa. Now the Mishnah goes on and discusses the case of a Kohen Hedjot who marries an Almana, and he has a brother who's the Kohen Gadol. So that's called Muteres Labal Asur Liyavim. So the Gemara asks, "My area the Ketani Almana Lisnei Bisula." Why does the Mishnah mention that the Kohen Hedjot married an Almana? Why not mention that he married a Bisula? And what that would mean is that she's Asur Liyavim because the Yisrael Almana Kohen Gadol, and there's no additional essay of Bisulea Yika because she's still a Bisula. Now, even if she was not an Almana who was married in a previous marriage to her first husband, she's still Asura Liyavam, who's a Kohen Gadol, because when her husband dies, she becomes an Almana. So we don't have to introduce the fact that she was once married in a previous marriage and she has the status of an Almana.